Have you ever asked a Latino a simple question and somehow never got a real answer? Can you help me tomorrow? Sí, de pronto. Can we meet at 3? Miramos. Can you send me that today? Sí, ahorita. To an English speaker, those all sound like yes, but many times they actually mean probably not. So why don't many Latinos simply say no? Is it dishonesty? Bad communication? Or is there a hidden rule that millions of foreigners never learn? Imagine you've been studying Spanish for months. You finally feel confident enough to have a real conversation with your Colombian friend. You ask, "Do you want to grab coffee tomorrow?" They smile. Sí, de pronto. Great. You think you have plans. Tomorrow arrives. No coffee, no message, nothing. You start wondering, did they forget? Did they change their mind? The surprising answer is probably neither. You didn't misunderstand the Spanish. You misunderstood the culture. Researchers who study intercultural communication have found that every culture balances two invisible goals whenever people speak. The first is sharing information. The second is protecting relationships. Some cultures, like the UK, Germany, or the United States, generally reward directness. Saying exactly what you mean is often seen as honest, efficient, and respectful. But across much of Latin America, conversations often have another purpose. Protecting the relationship can be just as important as delivering the message. That tiny difference changes almost everything. Imagine someone asks, "Can you help me move this weekend?" In English, it's perfectly normal to answer, "No, sorry, I can't." Short, clear, nobody thinks you're rude. Now imagine saying exactly the same thing in many social situations across Latin America. It's not wrong. People certainly do say no. But depending on the situation, it can sometimes feel too direct, too cold, or too final. So instead of closing the door immediately, many people gently leave it open. That's where these mysterious expressions appear. The first one is de pronto. If you look it up, it usually translates as maybe. But in real life, it can mean, "I don't think so, but I don't want you to feel rejected." Then there's miramos. Literally, "We'll see." Sounds hopeful. But depending on the tone, it can quietly mean, "I'm probably not going to do it." Nobody lied. Nobody made a false promise. The answer simply stayed polite and flexible. And then comes the word that confuses almost every Spanish learner. Ahorita. It literally means right now. Except, sometimes it means in 5 minutes. Sometimes after lunch. Sometimes later tonight. And yes, sometimes it means never. Foreigners often think Latinos are changing the meaning of the word, but that's not really what's happening. The word isn't changing. The context is. Linguists call this high-context communication. Instead of putting every piece of information into the words themselves, speakers rely on tone of voice, facial expressions, shared experiences, and social expectations to complete the message. In other words, the real meaning isn't only in the sentence. It's in everything surrounding the sentence. Psychologists believe humans naturally avoid unnecessary social conflict because maintaining good relationships has always helped communities survive. Different cultures simply develop different ways of achieving that goal. In much of Latin America, language became one of those tools. Softening a refusal isn't usually about being dishonest. It's often about showing kindness, respect, or consideration for the other person's feelings. And here's the funny part. Latinos usually understand each other perfectly. When one Colombian says, "Mi Ramos," another Colombian often already knows whether that's a real possibility or a polite no. They're not only hearing the words, they're reading the smile, the pause, the voice, the situation. Years of shared cultural experience fill in the blanks. Foreigners hear the dictionary, locals hear the intention. That's also why translation apps struggle with conversations like these. Google Translate can tell you that de pronto means maybe. That's technically correct. But it can't tell you whether that maybe means 80% yes, 50% yes, or absolutely not. Grammar translates words. Culture translates meaning. And that's one of the biggest secrets about learning Spanish. Fluency isn't just knowing more vocabulary,